I was with them. We came out to see you about a year ago. I don't know if you remember. At VeriSign.
I am awful with names.
We were in your labs.
Okay, my apologies. I know it's just a half past the hour here.
But I found that helpful.
4 minutes
but yeah,
to set up.
We were talking to Jim too, and I can. So yeah, we're just trying to see what comes of it.
We're getting closer to actually having to do something.
Yeah, no, that sounds like yeah.
And then, so I think it's probably worth our time to touch base again at some point.
Yeah, no, I was in the I was in the session at ICANN too that talked about the pilot and get maybe some potential law enforcement users in there to kind of see what they think of it. So you have a couple people who mentioned that, so that could be good. I think that's something pretty doable.
Okay. So I mean, I know I've got a very pointed question I wanted to ask someone like yourself.
Yeah.
Even if you're not the right person, I know you can find someone who is.
Yeah.
So when we talk about gated access, right, and this idea of, if you're willing to authenticate yourself, you would be able to get some type of access to more information. Do you think that there is any willingness, like at the FBI, to run some type of a server that could be used to issue credentials to FBI employees?
Probably not.
Okay, so this is going to be a problem.
Yeah,
Somewhere, some way, somehow, the only way we can grant privileges to people is if somehow we know who they are.
Yeah, that's what I've always said is going to be the issue too. Is
Right.
Authenticating.
Yes, and I can tell you it's not going to work from my perspective. Having to give usernames and passwords to everybody who wants to access our service.
Yeah.
It won't work because we don't have the customer support staff to be taking phone calls at all hours of the day. I forgot my password.
And yeah, I mean, no one in the FBI has an appetite to maintain that kind of data information.
Okay. So it's probably still worthwhile to talk at some point because it'd be willing. I think it'd be interesting if at some point we could come up with some type of a proposal for something that works for both of our communities.
Yeah, the other thing that I don't know how much it probably hasn't been discussed, but from a legal perspective, which I've tasked DOJ with looking into, is that the potential moving to gated, even if someone like VeriSign or ICANN or anyone is saying law enforcement gets ubiquitous access, it may still subject us to ECFA.
Well, it has to, because we don't know who law enforcement is.
Yeah, but I'm saying once you close the information that's publicly available in any sort of form, it may introduce ECFA, which is the Communication Privacy Act. So it's,
Oh, I'm sorry.
Then we need the subpoena, in which case law enforcement have no more interest in who it is, or it'd be moved.
Well, yeah.
So that's a separate issue, not for you guys to figure out. But I've kind of put it on DOJ's radar.
Thank you very much. This is the registration protocols extension.
Yeah.
Okay.
Stay in touch.
So let's
Sounds
get
good.
started. I'm going
Thanks
to
for
give
the
you the sheet
Yeah.
first.
Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you. I'm James Galvin, for those who don't know, and Inform Assurance is with us in the medical room. So he's a remote chair here today. Let's see, next slide. Obviously, Bill Bell is sort of the first thing up. As usual, just means that anything you say or do belongs to the IETF. Please take note of that. If you have any questions or concerns about any of this, you are encouraged to speak to your own legal representative and make decisions about what you are and aren't going to do within the IETF. There was a time when a lot of working groups used to put this up. I like to still continue to include it about document reviews. This working group tends to be somewhat slow moving for a variety of reasons. One of which is just making sure that we have people who review documents and actively engage in their discussions. So I'd like to put this slide up there and remind people that it's important to do that. And of course, for those with documents, it's always useful to state the somewhat obvious, I suppose, which is that if you want people to review your documents, it's always nice if you review theirs. So that works both ways for that. Okay. A reminder, we're actually having two meetings at this particular IETF, and we've got them all in one meeting time slot. At the last IETF, we had split our working group into 2 meetings. We actually had 2 time slots. Actually, the one before that, I'm sorry, not a meeting in the past, but we had 2 time slots. And this time, rather than doing 2 time slots, we felt that we actually just had 2 one-hour sessions. And the way they schedule them, the number of one-hour sessions availability, it just seemed easiest to do a 2-hour session and have half of it be our update and the second half be a working session. So we will just begin the working session immediately after our update here for this particular meeting. Okay, so jumping right into the update session and beginning here. First thing, of course, is always the Jabber Note Scribe. And, looking for volunteers who can help us out here. Let's see, where did you? Okay, yeah, so we have notes over here. We have a Jabber Scribe, someone who's just willing to watch the Jabber room and come up to the mic if anybody wants to speak. And we'll put some entries in the Jabber about what's going on in the room. Anyone? That's the easy job. The notes is always the hard one. Somebody, please. If you're sitting next to a mic, I'm going to pick on you. Except that, Scott, you get a pass. I see you shrinking.
Thank you.
Anyone to be a Jabber Scribe for us? Okay, thank you. All right, moving on quickly to the next item into the agenda. So existing document status, I think the most notable thing to point out here in this section is our launch phase document is actually working its way through the ISG. The reviews are happening, the author's been quite responsive and it's moving along. Did you want to say anything or just, no? Okay, so it's all good and that's the good news for us. And now moving on into the next set of updates. I actually added something to the agenda here. I added a number 4.5, mostly because when Roger gave us the slides that he had for wanting to talk about these things, he included that slide in there. I just figured I'd give him 0 minutes to give a little bit of an introduction as he gets up to the microphone here to talk about his 2 updates. To also give us the lead-in for what he's going to be talking about in the working session in the end. So Roger, if you'll come up here to the pink box, and we'll get the slides up for you. Might need to get a little closer. Sometimes it isn't. Is it on? Oh, okay. Maybe it's not on. Take a look at it. There we go.
That's better. There we go. Fee document. So we are, I think, Cal?
Just a quick note. I've got some feedback from Medeco saying that people can't hear you, Jim. Your mic might not be functioning. I don't know.
Okay, yes, I'm also seeing a note here from Antoine telling me that he's having trouble hearing me.
Yep.
I'll try and speak louder. I was reacting a little bit to the fact that it seems loud in the room, but we'll just make it loud in the room. Make sure you don't sleep on us. But back to you, Roger, please.
Okay. Thanks. Hopefully this is loud enough online as well. The fee document, I think we're there. We've got a couple open questions that we've popped up from implementation, actually, which is great. The next version is ready to be published. It hasn't been published yet. I think it's still 8 online right now. Revision 9 actually just added 1 extra item to the schema so that the client and server can have better type checking on the EPP. So that's the only change besides clarity. A lot of implementation work has been done. And a lot of clarity items have been added in, just text. The 2 questions that came up, I don't know if Jim wants to talk to him directly, but I'll raise them here. He talks about the CD avail flag and what that means if a partial return is done. So if you're only returning a partial set of the requested commands from the client, what should the CD avail flag be set to? And right now, my interpretation of the document is that it would return 0 if a partial set is returned. It would return 1 only if the full requested set is returned. So I don't know if there's any questions, any concerns.
Yeah, this is Jim Gould from VeriSign. So I actually had the opposite thought on that one. I thought that the avail thought actually be 1 if all of the fee information was there and 0 otherwise. So, and the reason why I'm saying this is that if it was 0, I was feeling that for the fast fail scenario, that then the reason would be required, and then otherwise it would not. So that's kind of the reason I had that.
So just to respond to you, that if you do a partial failure, are you not returning the reason?
That was the second part. Yeah. So if it was a partial fail scenario, that you could use the single reason to define why you're not including all of it, or you would have the reason under each of the commands itself, which when I was doing the implementation in the in RSDK, that I thought it was overly complex to figure out like how the client would actually process either a fast fail or a partial fail.
So I assumed from early on in discussions that registries would pick one or the other, most likely. So one's going to return a fast fail and not return anything, whereas other registries will actually try to process what they have and return that data, knowing that some data is going to be missing. So then that's why I said the 0 still works, because it didn't complete the command. It actually failed part of the command. But that's why the reason was in 2 locations as well. So is to give registries the option of running either or.
Yeah, I think having the 2 reasons is somewhat of a confusion as well. I'm thinking that if it was 0, that you would include an overall reason why it's not, well, if you said 0, that it would return a reason why you could not provide it. So anyways, I think there were 2 different scenarios, and I think that we've had some discussions on it offline, so.
Okay.
Hopefully we'll be able to bring it to the list.
Yep, absolutely. Any other comments on that? I will bring that up on the list as well, so. Okay. And the other one was?
Yeah, one item that came on the list that I wanted to get clarification on was associated with the classification, because the text in the draft says classification is associated with the object. And I know that there was prior discussion on the list that there was a question associated with classification, since the classification's on the command and not at the object level in the XML schema. But I believe, and I would like to hear from the other registries as well, is that I believe that the classification is truly at the object level. So if it's a premium domain name, the fees are associated with the fact that it is a premium domain name, and that if it happens that the renew price was the same for a standard and a premium name, that you wouldn't switch the classification based on the command asked for was renew. It's at the object level. So my proposal would be move classification up to under the CD element instead of at the command layer.
Yeah, and I think we did have this discussion. I don't know if it was on list or off list, but yeah, that was a discussion that was had, and it does make sense to me as well that it's at the object level, at the domain level, so that it should be moved up to that level. Again, if other registries have different thoughts, let us know. I'll post that to the list as well. So, okay. Any other questions or comments on the fee document? All right, I'll go ahead and post those last 2 remaining items to the list. Publish the next version shortly after that. I'll give time for comments, of course, but and then actually I'll ask for working group last call with that version. So.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Next slide, and go over to the validate document. So back to you again.
So the validate, I don't know if many people have read this or not, but This is intended to validate a set of contacts prior to registration. Typically, right, I should say today, if you can create valid contacts that on their own are okay, but when you actually do a domain create and assign them to a role, registrant, admin, or whatever, additional checking is done at that time and will fail the registration. So the goal of this extension is to actually provide a way to validate those contacts before actually trying to do a domain create. So there's only been a handful of comments online. Last version was published in August. And actually, if there's no further comments, we're just looking for implementers to implement it and work with GoDaddy on actually working through the implementation issues. So, any comments, Jim?
Yeah, this is Jim Gould from VeriSign. I re-reviewed it this morning. I know that we've had some prior discussions on this, but what I was having, I guess, some questions about was, it looks like it's passing all the contact data to validate, in essence, in preparation for maybe a contact create, even though it looks like you're trying to prepare for a domain create. So part of it is like whether or not you could use this for existing contacts as well as, you know, in preparation to create contacts, so that if you had a way, an implementer would say, well, am I supposed to look to see whether or not the contact information linked to that contact identifier is valid for this particular domain name or TLD? It's not clear in the draft whether or not you're doing it for existing contacts or new contacts. I know there's a working session on this later on. Maybe we might be able to go into this in a little bit more detail. But whether or not it's a precondition for a domain create or a contact create or both, I guess that's where it's going down to.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. And actually, it's intended for any contact, so new or existing contacts it's intended for. And the goal was the domain create, though obviously it can be used for the contact create as well. But the goal was originally so that once the domain create came up, there wouldn't be a chance of, or less of a chance of a failure. So, okay, yeah, and we will talk about it in the working session briefly. Again, there hasn't been a whole lot of comments on it. It is something that we actually run into every day. We'll be able to create our 4 contacts perfectly fine at the registry, and then go to do a domain create and it fails. So, and it happens multiple times a day for us. So it's a big issue. And I think that was it.
All right, and the slides, and the next one is talking about registry mapping. And again, you know, this is just an opportunity for Roger to talk about the working session we're going to be having. To put all these slides together, I just figured we'll let you go through all this now. So just take a few minutes to kind of set this up, and we'll try to have most of the discussion later during the working session. So just clarifying questions for now.
Yep. Thanks, Jim. So registry mapping, I think it came up last IETF, or maybe even the one before that, where we started talking about the correct place for defining some of the launch phase attributes. And we decided that the fee document wasn't correct. We decided that the launch phase document wasn't correct. So we started looking here, and then we realized actually this solves maybe some other problems that exist out there today. And again, we'll talk about this in the working session, but I brought along a questionnaire, we'll call it, that GoDaddy presents to registries when we're looking at onboarding a new TLD. The last time I heard, it was 400 and some questions. And the reason is a registry somewhere answers one of those differently. Every one of those 400 questions is answered somewhat differently by a different registry. So we have to know those parameters going into it and get our systems configured to handle it. So other than that, we just tagged on. This is actually a VeriSign, been out for quite a while now, several years. And it just seemed like a good place to pull that in and actually create a standard out of it. So, any questions? We'll get into, again, a lot more details in the working session. So.
And just so that folks know, Roger just talked about having distributed his questionnaire, as he called it. I will take ownership of that, not having been part of meeting materials until just before this meeting. We had unfortunately only uploaded these few slides from before, but I took the Excel spreadsheet that he gave us and turned it into a PDF. It's not a pretty PDF if you've ever done Excel spreadsheet. You know, it's not pretty unless you actually bother to figure out how to format it. And I took the easy way out for the purposes of just getting the document up there for people who want to grab it. But if folks have Excel and you actually want the actual document, I'm sure when we get into the working session, you'll distribute it around to whoever's there and wants to see it. So, but the meeting materials don't let you upload Excel documents anyway. That's why I didn't upload that directly. You have to make it a PDF. They'll take PowerPoints and docs and text files, and that's it. So, okay, I don't see anyone coming to the mic, so I guess that's it. Thanks, thanks, Roger.
Thank you.
That's great. Okay, that brings us to the next section where we want to just kind of go through and review some of our milestones. I'm going to try to do a little bit of a tag team here with Antoine. So maybe Antoine, if you want to jump into the queue here, and then I'll open it up so that we can see if you can speak and we can hear you.
Hi, everybody.
There we go. All right. Oh, that's right. I forgot. He was explaining to me once before that as the remote chair, you get a different kind of login, so he can just talk. He doesn't actually have to be approved to talk with the queue. Okay. So just to set up this discussion a little bit, one of the things to mention, folks will recall from earlier this year in the first meeting of the year, we had a desire to want to add some additional documents. Actually, it was a year ago. It wasn't even March, it was the fall meeting last year. We had a document in particular from Scott and one from Andy. So there was a desire to add some new working documents to our agenda, our list of milestones. And we got some pushback from our area director to, to clean up our milestone list and to move our documents along a little more smartly. He didn't want us adding additional documents until we kind of cleaned up where we were. Now, along the way, we have actually cleaned things up. We have moved a lot. We've gotten rid of a couple of documents and sort of set them aside and moved them off. Launch phase is obviously being published, and we have a number of documents which are very close to being published, all but published. In fact, I made a assertion to our area director yesterday in a brief discussion with him about this, that we are pretty close to 3 to 5 documents being ready to be pushed up for IESG publication, by the end of this calendar year, or certainly given the holidays. One of the questions that came up was, well, there's a lot of holidays between now and the end of the year, so maybe it'll be January of next year, first quarter. But in any case, we're setting ourselves up for being able to take on a number of documents. But as part of that, it seems useful to take a hard look at some of the documents that are there and really confirm that these things are ready to be pushed out the door or not, or what the specific actions are. Because we have a number of documents that just kind of are waiting, in part for reviews, in part for implementation issues. So we just need to decide if we're going to release these or what we're holding them back for in particular. So with that as a setup, we'll kind of take these things one at a time. Antoine is gonna jump in and talk about each document as we go along here, say what these documents, what their status is from the chair's point of view, and then we'll look for comments or questions from anyone in the room about the documents, so we can decide, what we really think our next step is. And the first one up here is the change poll document. So Antoine, over to you.
Yes, the change pool document. The chairs think that this is actually ready. The last time we talked about this was that we needed another review and we needed some implementation. I believe that it was Jacques and let's see, Jody, I think, that said that they intended to implement. So the question is actually to the authors. What do they think about the status? Is there anybody in the room?
Okay, Jim's coming to the mic. Oh, he's coming to the pink box. Yeah. No, Jim's coming to the pink box.
Yeah, it's Jim Gould from VeriSign. So yeah, I can go ahead and talk to both the change poll and the allocation token. The action item from the last working group session was to add the implementation information that Cal added for both drafts. So now we have implementation status information from Newstar and VeriSign for both these drafts, and we feel like it's ready, both of them, for last call.
Okay, so they're both ready for working. Do you need another revision of the document for that?
Say that again?
Do you need another revision of the documents for that?
No, we went ahead and updated it recently. Cal did. And so they're both ready.
Okay, so will you make a request for working last call on the mailing list?
Okay, yes.
And then we can move these along.
Yeah. Is there anyone who wants to object in any way to working group last call at this point? Okay, then that actually takes care of two of them. I don't know if you want to say anything else about the allocate, Antoine, but if not, you can move on to the DNS operator document.
Yeah, well, of course, the usual request I want to make to the working group is that even during working group last call, we need review, and we need people to speak up and say that they approve the document. It's no silent approval.
Yeah, just to emphasize that point, Antoine and I have talked about this, and in this group in particular, we'd really very much like to have 3 to 5 people who acknowledge that a document should move forward, who are not the authors of the document, which can make things a little interesting for us sometimes, because there aren't that many people who keep up with all of the documents. That's why we say 3 to 5. But please, as always, even if you don't have any comments, please do take a look at something and indicate your support for moving it forward, just so that we know that we have some sense of consensus from the working group on the mailing list. The usual IETF way of doing that is just sending a +1 when someone asks for support for a document as your message body. So please just keep that in mind. Antoine, back to you.
Yes, so the next document is the DNS operator to RRR protocol. Our deadline on the milestone list is in the future for this one. But it's been signed now for, I think, a few months already. The chair thinks that this document needs some more external review apart from the authors. I must admit that I need to do another review as well. I've requested some changes that I still need to verify if the text was correct. But I think this one is one that will stay in the queue. The deadline is not there yet, but I think the only thing it needs is some more specific review apart from the authors. And if that assessment is correct or not correct, I would like to hear that from the room.
So we have Jim coming to the microphone again.
Yeah, it's Jim Gould from VeriSign. Yeah, so I did a recent review of this draft, and I have a concern related to the fact that the trust relationship between the DNS operator and, in this case, the registry is not addressed in this particular draft. I think that's the big problem here, because if you did have trust between the DNS operator and the registry, you would just use EPP and the existing DNSSEC extension, RFC 5910, to do what needs to be done. So here, this is an alternative to use of EPP. And again, the trust relationship has not been addressed, so I don't really see this going anywhere.
Yeah, I sort of agree that
So, thank you for that.
there are shortcuts in this document that needs to be discussed properly.
Yeah, and I will, let me put myself in the queue, and speaking as an individual, not as chair, I really do need to agree with Jim Gold on this particular point for this document. I appreciate that the document works. Certainly we have Jacques Latour from CIRA as a CCTLD is actively working on this and built an implementation. I believe the folks from the Czech Republic are doing it too. So I think they actually do have 2 implementations of it. It really is interesting in that it works in that context, but it really is an issue for GTLDs for exactly the reason that Jim Gould was pointing at. So, it's difficult, I know, for me to support this document. And I think, well, I'm not trying to put too many words in Jim's mouth from VeriSign, but he's saying the same thing. He's just sort of in an awkward place. I don't see us being an implementer of this document, and that'll be kind of an issue. So Roger's next in the queue.
Yeah, hi, this is Roger. Besides the document does come out and say we're not going to talk about this in the document, which, yeah, I think is an issue. The other big issue that we have as a registrar is when registrant customer information gets changed outside of the registrar loop, it becomes an issue. And I know that this draft tries to do that, or tries to handle it by saying it can be done by registry or registrar. But the big issue is communication back to the registrar so that they have the most current information, because we will be the one speaking to the registrant when something goes wrong. So it's one of the facts that, yes, the security issue is big, but I also think that loop has to be figured out as well, as how does that get communicated all the way through the chain appropriately. And as Jim mentioned, I think that we have no intention today of implementing this. So if it changes, I don't know, but today we do not.
So we actually don't have the authors of this draft in the room here listening to this discussion. I know that they've heard this kind of message before. So I think, perhaps this is more of a heads up from the chairs to the working group that the milestone for this document is coming up. It's in the future. It's not in November. It's early in 2018. I'm sure we're going to get, pressed at some point here on what to do with this document. And I think the working group is going to have to come to a consensus about whether we're going to keep this on our to-do list or, set it aside for not being standards track and let these guys submit it as their own informational document and just put it in the extension registry in IANA as an individual contribution might be the way to go. So it's more of a status question for this working group to be thinking about. Okay, I don't see any other hands or anything else in the room, Antoine, so back to you.
Then we'll move up to the bundling discussion, which is actually more true what you just said, Jim. This is a document that tries to standardize a form of bundling. I have an enormous echo at the moment, so please forgive me if I speak very slowly. I hear myself back in the mic. So after the bundling BOF and some more discussion, it was discovered that doing bundling could be done in 3 different ways. And this resulting draft only talks about one of these options to do bundling, which the chairs consider it not being a standard in the way that we want to standardize things in a way of, you only have one way to do things. That being said, this is a good documentation how mostly some of the Asian registries, mostly CNIC, and I think some others too, are doing bundling at the moment. So there is justification for documenting this, but we believe that this will not be a one standard fits all. So a suggestion is to make this document informational, and then just register it to the registry, and we can move it off our list in that way, unless there is, of course, objection to that, and we think that this is the standard way of doing things. So, is there any discussion in the room? Are there any other opinions?
So one of the authors is up here at the mic. John Kang is in the pink box here. Go ahead.
Yeah. My name is Jian Kang Yao. One of the co-authors for the boundary draft. You mentioned the bounding discussion also about the bounding both, because but this kind of bounding is just in registration level. It doesn't matter with the DNS level of bounding. So there's a different. I think make a different issue. So for this kind of bundling in Scenic, we have a plan for many years, especially for Chinese community. We have an organization called CDNC, Chinese domain name consortium. So including SGNIC, CNIC, TWNIC, HKRC, and Asia. So we have the main principle document in this document has already adopted by CDNC for many years. So it already allowed to practice. Also, CNIC and Telinfo also already implemented. So in future, I think more registry will implement this document. Thank you.
I must say that I don't disagree with the fact that it's a good extension or that it's well implemented at the moment in CNIC. The discussion is, what if
Oops. I think we lost Antoine. Okay. I think he was going to, the statement that he was going to make is it's partly about the status of the document. It may be that this is not appropriate for a standards track document, which is really the question for us to think about. But now we have a queue lining up, so let's just run through the queue. You can stay here and we'll get the comments. So Scott.
Sure. Scott Hollenbeck. One thing I'd like to see, if we do decide to take this to informational, is the addition of an implementation status section. If the document is intended to describe information about an existing implementation, let's put that text into the document and describe your experience in implementing it. And if you know of others who have implemented it, add that to the text as well, please.
So is that a suggestion you can take on board at an implementation status section? Okay.
Lincoln, one of another author of this internet draft, and I have a question for Anton. I'm just wondering what kind of other use case you can mention about the bundling. For us, we try not only provide the informational suggestion for the bundling requirements. Mostly we focus on the IDM variants, but we do know there are some kind of other bundling requirements from non-IDM variants. But I think our mechanism or our technical solution could be flexible to meet any other use cases. So if you do have some other real use cases, please provide to us and we can update our mechanism. Thank you.
Am I back?
Yes,
Okay.
you're back. Go ahead.
So to respond to that, I believe there's discussion going on later in this session about some DNAME issues that came up. I don't know if that's another use case. The only thing I know is that we couldn't agree during the bundling buff which sort of bundling DNS-wise is actually the one size fits all way of doing bundling. And that says to me that at the moment there is no clear consensus yet about a one-size-fits-all bundling solution. And that makes me wonder, perhaps there are no other bundling solutions coming up in the future, but as long as we don't agree, we don't have consensus that this is the only way that will work, I don't think it should be a standard. Well, and that's no judgment on the legitimacy of this document, because I think it's a good document. It describes very well how CNNIC is doing bundling at the moment, and I think it should be documented and it should be registered in the registry.
Yeah, I think for the standard track draft layer, the major change is about what kind of object, what kind of item we need to bundle for the registration level. So our draft only talk about the EPP extension registration level. So maybe we can have the one set for all bundling registration for the EPP layer. If there is another use cases, maybe not all the object or item want to be bundled together, we can set different items, different object to be bundled or not one by one. That's all.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Did you want to say something, Antoine? Or
No, go next in queue, please.
Edmund Chung here. So building on, I guess, what Ning was saying, and I think in general, I mentioned this on the mailing list as well. I want to give it another kick in the can, I guess. Bundling right now, we're thinking about it as a very general concept. The question is whether it is worthwhile, perhaps one question is whether it's worthwhile if it's just focused on IDN variants as well. Because of the progress now, both at ICANN and also at the LGR, the label generation rule sets, which frames what we now can more definitely talk about in terms of IDN variants. And it's a big component of EPP itself. I mean, it should be ultimately growing to become a big component of standard EPP transactions. So I think besides just thinking about whether this should, we push this to informational or not, maybe the question is also if it is just focused on IDN variants for the cases of that are talked about in LGRs and IDN implementation guides and at ICANN, is that worthwhile as a standard? I think it should be.
Okay, thank you. And we'll let Jim be the last one in the queue here, and then we'll try to tie up this conversation in the interest of time.
Yes, this is Jim Gold from VeriSign. So in re-reviewing the draft, there are a few open items that I would see, and I can post a list on this as a standard. Is first off, there is no ability to be able to enable or disable the variants where, if these were going to be, they may even be billable. So in essence, if you wanted the capability of allowing for variants to be enabled and disabled, then you get into issues of grace periods and other elements that are complex in nature. Because I'm a co-author on a different proprietary extension as well that's dealt with this. The other is related to DNSSEC. I don't think it's mentioned in there, but is there an assumption related to the use of the key data interface for DNSSEC? Those kinds of elements would need to be dealt with to make it into a true standard for at least this kind of bundling, this kind of relationship.
So thank you. I'm going to add a comment and then give the last word to Antoine, I think. I would say this discussion has been a success, from my point of view as chair. We've been kind of looking at this document and wondering, how to go forward and try to find a way to prompt some discussion. I think the critical question here is standard versus informational, and clearly we have some questions about what it means to be standard and some other things that need to be addressed. So if John Kang and Ning sort of take on those questions, and maybe we can drive some discussion now on the mailing list to try and deal with those issues, so that we can move this forward.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and then so over to you, Antoine, for a last word.
Yeah, so for this document in particular, I don't have any more remarks. I really like the discussion indeed. There's still the discussion of the authors want to have this as a standards track, and there are some others that have, well, at least concerns about standards track because issues have not been addressed yet. And I think we should continue that discussion on the mailing list.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, that brings us to the last couple of documents here related to the org. So
Yes.
Antoine, go ahead.
So these are the org documents. They have a date in the future as well. These are, of course, the results of the documents that first were the reseller documents. And there seemed to be quite some interest in the reseller extensions. But now that they've turned into more generic organizational drafts, the interest has sort of like slipped away. I think that these documents need another thorough review. At least I need to make another review, I know. But it could also use some implementation status, I think, or some intention of implementation. So I would like to ask the authors if they have any plans on pushing for review or adding more implementation, if they are aware of anybody that is going to do some implementation on these documents.
Yeah.
And we have Ning in the pink box up here.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
This is Ning. We'll try to update our org drafts and to add a implementation status section. And these drafts are changed from reseller draft. And for the reseller draft, these drafts are implemented by Cynic, New Star, Verson, Verson and Patrick for the open source EPP software. But for the org draft, now no one really implemented it, but Cynic is planning to research on making a demo of the org draft. And I'm not sure, we discussed with Verson guys, and you do have interest in implementing this draft in future. Maybe not, you can correct me. And for this point, I also want to call for more implementation about this org draft, and because we have a long discuss about the requirements from the reseller and the requirement from extension of organization. So we do believe that there is meaningful to do this kind of extension and make some implementation on this topic. Yeah.
So I want to put myself in the queue too, but behind Jim, over to you.
Yes, Jim Gould from VeriSign. So I'm a co-author on these drafts, and we originally started with the reseller, which is a little bit more controversial, and I think that's the reason why you're getting comments on the list. Once we went to something more generic, it's less controversial, less comments. So what I had posted to the list was a proposal to have these drafts be implemented for what I would consider low-hanging fruit, which would be for registrar information. VeriSign has built or has created a proprietary extension that provides registrar information to support transfers. I thought that this would be a perfect opportunity to be able to leverage these extensions to be able to help registrars in supporting transfers on a topic that's less controversial. So I guess I would be kind of looking at Roger here from GoDaddy, whether or not GoDaddy would have interest in being able to support this extension for providing registrar information for transfers.
So while Roger's coming up to the queue, I'll step up to the mic. So this is Jim Galvin just speaking for myself here. And to add on to, I guess, a question for Ning and other authors more generally. Mm-hmm. Roger's about to talk from his point of view as a registrar, but are there other significant GTLDs outside of the CCTLD context? So registries that have or will implement this, and are there registrars to go with them to use it? I mean, I realize that you're using it in CNNIC, and you've got obviously registrars in China that are doing it, but are there implementations that exist elsewhere in any other context?
Yeah.
You can respond to that, and then we'll go to Roger.
Yeah. Please. Yeah. From now, we don't know any more registrar implemented such kind of implementation. Yeah. So please, GoDaddy, you want to share something?
Yeah, this is Roger again. Yeah, I mean, we've looked at this since the beginning, and we've never found a reason for us to actually implement this. It's data that we're not sure should be, I guess, shared across the two third parties, I guess. So right now, I guess Jim brought up a good question on transfers and stuff. Doesn't make sense. I guess I'm going to have to look at that in that context. But right now, we have no thought of actually implementing this because we don't see the purpose and what the system's going to gain out of this information. So,
yeah, I think there were repeatedly discussion on the requirements of this topic, and from the original period, and the reseller requirement were approved by the working group because we do have real requirements from New Star, one of our proxy, and who have a lot of resellers, and their resellers want to show their information on our WHOIS database. Yeah, that's the real requirement. But when we do the draft on this topic and people discuss that, why not make some general object extension, not only focus on reseller, and maybe in the future, registrar and proxy, privacy proxy can also reuse such kind of extension. Yeah.
Okay, I want to add myself in the queue to make a comment too. I see we have Jody in the queue. I'm going to move Jody up.
I was in the queue as well.
And Jody, go ahead.
Hi, can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right, I think I've got an echo going, but I was just going to echo what Roger was saying, is that we really don't have a reason to implement this extension. Giving that information to the registry about our resellers is not something that we want to do or will be willing to do. We consider that to be information that's just not needed by the registry. Now, I know that there is an ICANN, not a requirement, but it's optional data to send to the registry who the reseller of record is. And that is true that this could be used for that. We just think that this is an overkill as far as providing all information about the reseller besides just the reseller name.
Okay.
And as far as a transfer, I guess I'd like to see how this would be used for transfers. Before I can make a decision or comment on that. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Jody. So I'll just add a chair's comment and then over to Antoine for the last word here on this. I think this document also falls into kind of a similar category to the DNS operator and even the bundling document. There's a real question as to whether or not it should be a standard or an informational document. A standard does require, much more broad applicability and broad implementation is really a requirement to be on the standards track. So that's just an important consideration as we go forward as to how we meet that requirement. And okay, well, before we go over to you, Antoine, Scott stepped up into the queue. So Scott, go ahead.
Scott Hollenbeck here. Since when is implementation a requirement for progression to proposed standard?
Implementation is not required, but I think broad applicability is really the key phrase that I was trying to get to.
Okay. Like I said, just minor process point there. And if I could build on that, not just applicability, but this notion of interest and consensus, right? There has to be broad support for the concept. And, go ahead, Andy.
No, finish. That's what you were going to say.
No, I'm done.
Oh, okay. One more in the queue, Antoine, before you jump in again.
Sorry, Andy Newton. So I really don't have a dog in this fight. What really concerns me about the conversation is you have people saying, I'm not going to use it, and that's being turned into don't do this. And I don't really like that. That doesn't sit well with me. Some people, obviously we have some interest in it, And if it's not harmful for us to do this, I don't see why we shouldn't do it. Now, whether it's informational standard, I understand that argument. But I don't see why there hasn't been an argument put forward yet saying this is bad. So I don't think that should stop this from going forward.
Right. No, yeah, thank you for that. I certainly am not trying to say that it's bad. I don't think that Antoine is either. I'll let him speak for himself. I actually haven't gotten a sense that people are saying it's bad. I think people are reacting to whether or not it should be a standard. And to speak more, to add a little bit, and elaborate a little bit on Scott's point, I mean, I use the phrase broad applicability. This working group is in sort of an odd place because there are only a few people who participate in this group actively, who are what I would call, an important part of the industry players. There are a lot of interested parties here in some of this work, and that's a good thing, and we should continue with that. But I do find it a challenge as chair to judge what consensus is, and I try to pay very careful attention to who actually is in support of something and who's not, because it really does matter. Whether you're a registry or a registrar and how many of them there are. There just aren't that many of us who are in this room. And so I try to be really careful about that. And broad applicability is what matters to me. I mean, I appreciate that it's something which is very applicable to the folks at CNNIC and in China. Certainly you're using it and it works for you. But whether there's a use case outside of that context does worry me a little bit as chair in trying to judge consensus. And so we're running really short of time with two other presentations, but go ahead, Andrew. I was going to say, you're up at the mic, you might as well, and then Antoine gets the last word here.
I'm Andrew Sullivan, and like Andy, I guess I don't care a whole lot about this process thing, except that I recall that part of the reason a lot of this stuff got going was because people kept saying there's not a single place where all these extensions are written down and it's causing us problems. So if this working group isn't going to do the work to produce, one canonical set of the stuff that people think, if you're going to do one of these things, here's how to do it, then please point us to the place where that can be done so that there's this consistency, because the whole point of EPP was that it was supposed to be extensible, like not in a million trillion pieces, right? So I think actually there's a positive reason to prefer publishing the document if you've got interested implementers. Thanks.
Yeah, and we're agreeing with that. That's what the extension registry is for, and that's what it means to be informational, is just to get in that list. It's just not on the standard track. That's all. Okay, did you want to say something, Bing? I'll let you respond, and then
only one or two sentences. My feeling about these things make me a little confused. Because I'm not sure whether when we make conclusion about which kind of draft are adopted by our working group, did we repeatedly discuss each time about this draft should be adopted by working group or not? Every time we use some energy to discuss that. Every time we may have newcomers, and newcomers maybe judged us this draft we do not use and do not need use our working group energy to make it or not. Every time we do really need to discuss it, I'm not sure. And because we used our energy for years, make reseller draft, and based on the working group discussion output or conclusion, we modify the reseller draft to the general organization draft, and somebody stand up and tell us these things doesn't make sense. I'm a little confused. That's all. Thanks.
Yes, some closing remarks. And these are personal comments for first. As you know, I'm Dutch, so I'm very blunt. I find it very interesting to hear from registrars when we were discussing the DNS operator to RRR protocol, that they say, the registrar should always be in the middle of the data stream and they should always be aware of any information that's going to be used for registrations. So there the registry says, okay, we're willing to play this middle role where it comes to data that has to go to the registry. And for this OR document where the registry has some need for specific information, or perhaps it's even in the benefits of the registrant to have this information in the registry, the registrar says, well, nah, we're not interested in this sort of information because perhaps there can be some things be done with this data that is not in our interest. I find that a bit contradictory to each other, and it's a nice discussion. I think that this document has progressed to a way of being a generic organizational extension, that it can be used for many more things than the reseller extension that it originally was. And so I think it's in a state now where it can be a standards track document. And I think this document only needs some more review and some positive review with that in mind, not with the old reseller extension in mind, because that one was, I agree, too narrow to be a standards track document. So let's discuss this further on the list and have some push from the authors to get some more review.
Okay, I think that brings us to the end of the milestone review. We are running over time, but the time really is ours, so I'm going to allow the two presentations here to go on. And so Andy wants to come back and talk about his RDAP JCR document. Let me get your slides up here for you.
All right. So I think this came up at the last IETF. Mario brought up, he came to the mic and said something about schemas or ways of formalizing the JSON in RDAP. And I'd actually worked on a draft that had expired 6 months previous to that. And for some reason, I had dropped the whole idea. But since he brought it up, I thought it was a good idea. And I was encouraged to update the draft. Next slide, please. So RDAP uses JSON, and one of the problems is that the draft there's several RDAP drafts, but the one that actually describes the JSON is a very long draft. What makes it extremely long is the fact that all that JSON is described in prose. And one of the problems that we ran into when we were doing the going through the whole RFC process, and there was the the weirds interop mailing list, and then we had all those sessions in the terminal room where people were trying to get their RDAP implementations to work. There were a lot of misinterpretations about what some of that meant, so that was kind of a problem. But we still today don't have any we worked through it, but we don't have any formalism for what we described there. So this can make testing things and even developing the software a little difficult. Next slide, please. So this draft is an attempt to take what's in the RFC and actually create a formal syntax for that JSON there. So it uses this thing called JSON content rules, which is something I've been working on for a while, along with Pete Cordell. Basically, JCR is what you would call a data definition language or a schema language for JSON. It's very similar to XML schema, or actually it's more akin to actually RelaxNG for XML. It's concise, more concise than prose, so once people know how to read it, it's easier for them to read. The other thing about this is that for a lot of people who aren't native to English, reading all those prose can sometimes be a little, it's not the easiest thing in the world. So when you have a formal syntax, it makes it easier for them to understand what's going on. Next slide, please. So why DDL? So I will admit I have looked at a lot of the uses of JSON. I've looked at a lot of the RFCs that we've published in the IETF, and to be honest, the vast majority of them do not need this type of thing. In most cases, the way we use JSON, especially in the IETF, it's very simple, and putting some sort of formal data definition language in there would probably make it worse, not better. That being said, RDAP is not in that category. RDAP has a very complex, very extensive use of JSON. where we have a lot of nested objects. We have a lot of objects that get reused all over the place. So it is not in that same category. It is actually a good candidate for a DDL. This is a quote actually when we went to the RFC process. We got the IETF last call feedback, and this is what Tim Bray said. Tim Bray is not a very big fan of DDLs, but he actually said, you know, this is a good case. This is a good candidate for it. So next slide, please. Just a little bit about JCR here. JCR is actually a superset of JSON. So if you already know how to read JSON, it's easy to kind of come into what JCR is. And we actually looked at it and we put features in there to try to help people who are implementing software create compatibility kits and test suites. So in the first box up here, we have this is an actual JSON snippet from RFC 7159. And the second box is actually the JCR, which is basically saying, you know, the first member there is a string, the second one's an integer that starts with 0 to infinity and so forth. And then we continue abstracting it. And by the time you get down to the green box, this is what you could use for testing. You could say for this particular use case, make sure that this rule has a specific value and this other rule has a specific value. So I don't want to go into the full details of what JCR is, but that's essentially what it's about. Next slide, please. So where am I with the JCR for RDAP draft? So, at the moment, I'm collecting feedback. Mario had a lot of comments, and someone else had a lot of comments on the mailing list. It was all very positive and basically showing me that I hadn't quite read the RDAP JSON correctly, or there were things I hadn't put into the JCR, which is kind of interesting since I'm the author of the RDAP JSON draft RFC. So again, it's very complex, and so there's a lot of stuff you can miss in there. There's an RDAP client I have called NICinfo. It's a command line client, and what I want to do next is I want to take the JCR that we have and apply it to that, so that way people can download that. It already has some other slight conformance stuff it'll do for RDAP, but this will actually allow it to more formally check the JSON. So I'm gonna try to do that, and that'll help people who are implementing servers to get pretty good feedback. The other thing is next year at Aaron, we are looking at expanding our internet routing registry, and one of the things we want to do is throw route objects into RDAP as well. And so we're going to be writing a bunch of extensions, and to do that, as opposed to doing more lengthy drafts that have a bunch of pros in there, we're actually going to look at using JCR for this. We already use it for doing inter-RAR transfers between all the RARs, so it's not something it's getting use. So anyway, questions, comments? None.
I am Mario Alfredo from Register.it. You know that I'm following another approach based on the JSON schema. Mm-hmm. Honestly, I must say that JSON content rules are better than the JSON schema because they are more compact and because they are more compliant to. More naturally compliant to the way, to the style RFCs are written. But I see some issues in the implementation, in the use of JCR to describe formally the an all REST service. One issue is about the lack of a description of the requests and the relationship between requests and responses. That, as far as I know, it is lacking currently in JCR. And the second issue is about the number of implementation supporting JCR. Currently, I think there are very few implementations about JCR with respect to the implementation, the number of implementation about the JSON schema. So I'm not a fan of JSON schema, but when I try to find a data definition language of JSON-based REST services, I found a lot of materials about JSON schema, libraries, examples, tutorials, and quite nothing about JCR. So I was oriented to use JSON schema to describe the RDAP responses and requests.
Yeah, so let me address that. The first part about the things that JSON schema does with meta schemas and so forth, that was never a goal of JCR. The way, you know, RDAP says this query gets this object is via an RFC, not some other means. So yeah, there are a lot of things that JSON schema attempts to solve that JCR was never designed for, was never what we intended to do. JSON schema is a much larger community, I will admit, much larger. And because it's in JSON, their implementations are a little easier to do. But there are also a lot of problems with it. They continue to iterate as well. And I'm not saying that one's better than the other. It's just that you know, in my opinion, I've read JSON schema. I've attempted to use it. I always find something I don't like about it, and that's why we went down this whole JCR route to begin with. When it comes to what we want to do, what we want to say in the IETF about whether this is done in JCR or JSON schema or whatnot, I don't know what the correct answer to that is. One of the things, and I don't know if there is a correct answer. I think that's a better way of putting it. It would be interesting if we had something published in JSON schema as well to describe what RDAP is doing here. And that might be, both may be beneficial, not just one. So, yes, Scott.
Scott Hollenbeck. So generally, I like this approach, which is one of the reasons that when we did EPP, I used XML schema because it gives you a nice automated way of validating certain things. But I do have a question. So the RDAP JCR document depends on your generic JCR document, correct?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Are you suggesting that the working group eventually adopt both? Because we can't do the RDAP one without the JCR one existing.
That's a good question, and I don't have a good answer to that either.
All right. And so and then the comment, I'm not so sure that this working group is the right place for the generic JCR document to be developed.
That may be true as well.
But I don't know where the right place is, much like you just kind of said yourself, I think.
What'd you say? I didn't.
Well, I would probably send it off to the dispatch group and let them sort it out, honestly.
But I mean, so there is no official IETF or any SDO has something that describes JSON.
Right.
So we're back to doing things in prose if we're just going to keep punting this around. To be honest, my JCR co-author and I have discussed whether it's even worth the time to even doing this in the IETF. And it's it's an important question. Yeah, I don't have an answer to where this would live. So
just one word. There's a working group, JMap, which deals with JSON mail access. Maybe you could sneak it in there.
I don't see why you would punt it from one application to another.
Okay, I want to close the queue up there, except I see our area director standing. If he wants to insert himself at any point or wait to the end, that'll be fine. Otherwise, next in line.
I'll go at the end. Thanks.
Okay.
Matthew Miller. So when it comes to various ways of describing JSON, the best that I think is actually making some traction right now is not necessarily specific to JSON, but is CUDL, the concise data definition language that's happening in CBOR. I don't know if it's worth trying. Well, this work isn't going to happen in the JSON BIS working group because it's going to shut down once the document gets published. I don't know that there's any place else that could take this on or take on JSON schema. I honestly think your best bet is to look at how adapting to using CUDL.
So I really don't like that answer because that's not JSON, and they have different things they're doing in there. The other thing is that when they started that work, they actually cited the JCR draft as where they got some of their ideas from. We've iterated on this since they did their initial work, and this is much the things we've done in JCR are much more specific to JSON than what you can do with CDDL. You guys calling it cuddle? Now is that it?
Yes, that's
cute.
That's what it's called. Well, I mean, I understand all that, but I mean, have you talked to anybody else about trying to move JCR forward?
So it's one of those projects that I work on, from time to time. I haven't had to do it full time. No, to be honest, I haven't talked in the JSON working group about this for a while.
I remember.
Yeah, it's been a while. And we have gotten feedback from there, and that a lot of that feedback has been incorporated into the current draft. Whether what the IETF does with that, I don't know. Like I said, I don't have the answer to that. I don't think cuddle let me rephrase that. I don't think cuddle is necessarily the right solution for people who are doing complex JSON. Because first off, it's not JSON itself. It's talking about CBOR. The other thing I want to be very careful about is I know the JSON schema people also have internet drafts. I'm on their mailing list, and they talk about revising it, and I don't know when they're going to do that. I don't want to get into this little fight with them either. So I'm kind of trying to avoid a lot of politics, I guess.
I don't envy the position. I'm just pointing out that there's definitely traction happening with cuddle. CBOR is effectively a superset of JSON.
Yeah, but people may also make that argument with Yang as well. So,
well, yeah.
Okay, I want to be careful not to have a long discussion about trying to find the right solution here to questions. We are a little short on time and getting shorter here.
Tim Ruijsels, Ripe NCC. I want to keep this very short. I'm not aware of all the other efforts in this area, but what I really like about this is that it's easy to understand and it's not trying to solve everything in the world. To me, that's really useful if you just want to have a quick clarification of whatever you're specifying. So I think this is useful work.
Okay, thank you. And now down to our area director.
Yeah, Adam Roach. So I wanted to clarify what I thought I heard earlier. Were you proposing that the JCR-based document actually be taken on in this working group?
No, I never said that. I said I don't have an answer for that. Like I said, right now, specific to the RDAP version of this, I'm trying to collect feedback to see if it's even useful. My mindset is I'm much more interested in getting work done than trying to sit there and play with drafts. So.
Okay, and I'm sympathetic to that. I just wanted to make sure, if that were the proposal, I was going to point out some reasons that shouldn't happen. But if that's not what you're proposing, I'm good with y'all playing around with this, sort of individual. I think we probably want to have a story for how we would get whatever your underlying technology is pushed through to an RFC before you start putting working group drafts on top of it.
Yeah, and there may be other answers to that too. So maybe I should talk to you about that afterwards.
Okay,
So,
I'm busy after this
At
session,
some point,
but I will.
not-
I'll hook up with you so we can have a conversation around that. Thanks.
all right. Mhm. Is that it?
Okay, thank you, Andy. We have one more next up here. Mario. Okay, let me get your slides up here for you.
Hello, everybody. I'm Mario Loffredo from Register.it. And this presentation, I talk about 3 ADAP drafts, namely sort and paging, partial response, and reverse search. Please, next. The 3 drafts are quite recent. The first draft is at its second version, and the first version was submitted on last May. Next, please. The first two drafts shares the same goal to bring best operation practices in REST services design into ADAP. We all know that REST services should offer capabilities for result filtering, sorting, paging, and subsetting for many reasons. Minimize the traffic on the net, speed up the response time, improve the precision of the query, and obtain more reliable results, decrease the load of the server and the query processing, and spend less CPU time and memory on the client. Next, please. Despite this good principle in REST service design, the current status of ADAP shows some inefficiencies because a search query can return a larger result set, and the result set can be truncated according to the server limits. But ADAP lacks of result filtering, sorting, and paging capabilities. In fact, you cannot restrict the result set by adding further search condition. You can obtain in the response the total number of objects found. You cannot specify possible sort criteria to have the most relevant object at the beginning of the result set to avoid the truncation or relevant results. Besides, you cannot scroll the result set when the result set is truncated. And finally, servers can only provide full responses. Next, please. To overcome these inefficiencies, the sorting and paging draft presents 4 new parameters. Count, a Boolean value that allows to obtain in the response the total number of objects found that due to the truncation can be different from the number of returned objects. Sort by, that is a string value that allows to specify sort order for the result set, and the limit and offset that allows to specify what portion of the entire result set must be returned. Limit and offset together implement result set pagination. New properties in the response are consequently added. Paging count is reported in the response when the count parameter is put in the query string and is set to a true value. And paging links that provide the ready-made reference to the next page of the result set when the truncation takes place. Servers returning paging links or paging count properties must include the appropriate string in the AirDAP conformance array. And there has been proposed a different approach to the pagination by using cursor. Cursor is an opaque URL safe string representing a logical pointer to the first result of the next page. The proposal has been made by Brian Mumford from Google. Next, please. In the slide are reported 2 samples of the response, including paging count and paging links based on offset. In the first example, the result set is truncated, and the paging links reports a link to the next page of the result set. And the second example is the version of the paging links property that uses the cursor option. Next, please. But what are the pros and the cons of offset and the cursor-based pagination? Offset pagination is supported natively by major relational DBMSs and most popular NoSQL databases, so it's very easy to implement. It provides maximum flexibility, but does not scale well in case of huge result sets. I think that here the limits over which to consider a result set huge is 100,000 records. It may return inconsistent pages when data are very frequently updated, but I think that this is not the case of registration data. Cursor-based pagination, also known as key set pagination or the seek method, scales well in case of huge result sets, but is difficult to implement because it is not natively supported by the VMSs. It requires at least one key field. It needs that all comparison and sort operation have to be reversed if a server wants to implement also backward pagination. It raises further issues when objects aggregate information coming from possible different data sources, like entities that maps information belonging to different entity roles. It's not flexible because it does not allow to sort by any field and paginate the results, because sorting has to be made on the key field. It does not allow to skip pages because pages have to be scrolled sequentially starting from the initial page. It could also be considered unpractical because time needed to build the current page could be much higher than the scrolling time needed by the offset pagination. And this is true, especially when the object, the returned object presents a lot of multi-valued properties. And one question is if my add observer usually deal with huge result set. So in certain cases, it's not worth implementing this method. Next, please. The second draft is about partial response. Partial response is a simple idea that has been around for quite a long time in the REST service design. The idea is that instead of returning the responsive with all data fields, only a subset is returned. We can distinguish two approaches to the implementation of partial response. The first approach that we can call the fields approach is used by leading REST API providers, and according to it, the client declares explicitly the data fields to obtain the response. The second approach that we can call field set is used in digital libraries and bibliographic catalogs, and according to it, the client declares a name identifying a server predefined set of data fields. Next, please. What are the characteristics of the two approaches? Fields provides maximum flexibility because clients can specify exactly the fields they need. It's not easy to implement because fields have to be declared according to a given syntax, and the presence of arrays and deep nested objects may complicate both syntax definition and consequently the server processing of the query. It does not facilitate interoperability because clients should perfectly know the structure of the returned object to avoid the declaration of invalid list of fields. And finally, it raises additional issues according to server authorization because it may happen that clients could request unauthorized fields, and servers should define a strategy to provide a response, to return an error, or to return a response ignoring the unauthorized fields. The latter approach is less flexible, but do RDAP user really need the maximum flexibility? Probably no, because I think that RDAP users quite always request the same set of strongly related data fields. It can be easily implemented and it facilitates interoperability because server can define some basic field sets which if known previously by the client, can increase the probability to get valid responses. Finally, it fits better server authorization. In here, the servers can operate in two ways, not exclusive, mutually exclusive. The list of fields for each set can be different according to the access levels, and some field sets could be available only to some users. Next, please. So the partial response draft introduces one new parameter, field set, that is a string value identifying a predefined set of fields. To facilitate interoperability, we think that some values are required. ID that contains only the object class name field and the field identifying the object. It can be used when the client wants to obtain only a collection of object identifiers. Brief, it contains the fields that can be included in a short response. It can be used when the client is requesting for a set of properties which gives only a basic knowledge of each object, and the full that contains all the information the server can provide for an object. Additional consideration can be made. The brief and full field set should be defined according to the access levels. Servers may implement any other additional field set, and servers should also define a default field set. Next, please.
Can I just need to ask if it's possible to move this along a little bit. I know we kind of cut you a little bit short on time. Yeah. But I see you've got still like 5 slides to go, and we're cutting into our working session meeting.
Okay. If you, I can stop here if you want. I move frequent. I move live. Quickly.
Yeah, if you could just try to move.
Yeah.
A little
Okay.
more quickly through the slides.
The last draft is about reverse search. You know all that reverse search is provided by many web applications, and users from this service, users can find domain names starting from the owner details. But currently, registry already perform reverse searches because they provide the registrar with domain names related to contact name server and the NSSX keys. Possible reason to these requests are the loss of synchronization between registrar data and registry data, and the need of such data to perform bulk APP updates. Next, please. In the past, there has been some possible objection to the implementation of reverse WIS and reverse search in general. One is the potentially privacy risks, but ICANN itself points out that reverse WIS is allowed when it is driven by some permissible purposes if it provides adequate security policies. And the RDAP provide these security policies because it relies on features available in other layers. The second concern has been about impact on server processing, but RDAP already supports searches, and the impact of both standard and reverse searches is absolutely similar. and can be mitigated by server adopting ad hoc policies. Next. So the draft proposes new segment paths of the endpoint domains, entity handle, entity FN. The search patterns are the same as specified in RFC 7482, and a new parameter is also proposed, entity role, that allow to restrict results to a specific entity role. Since in ADAP entities are in relationship with all searchable objects, it is possible to evaluate the extension to other paths. Next. Skip. No. The last slide. I think that there are some point of discussion within the working group with regards to the sorting and paging. How should the sorting properties be defined? Is an IANA registry appropriate? How might new parameters work without the use of a relational DBMS? Should RDAP specification reports both offset and cursor parameters and let operators to implement pagination according to their needs, to the user access levels, the submitted queries? And with regards to reverse search, should reverse search be based on other entity details? Should reverse search be be extended to the other types of searches? That's all.
So just to be clear, you're not asking for, at this time, or are you not asking for working group adoption or anything like that? You're just bringing this to the attention of the working group?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So I mean, I just wanted to add then from my own point of view, speaking as chair, I think this is interesting and important stuff. I do think this working group is, at least the mailing list, is an appropriate place to discuss this. That's why we, wanted to go along with this presentation being here and getting some discussion. But what we do with it going forward is kind of open at the moment. So any comments from anyone? But Andy, go ahead.
Yeah, Andy Newton. My first comment is, and I'm sorry I haven't had a chance to read all of it. I read some of it and I didn't realize how many drafts you had. But it all looks very interesting. I think before we would do anything like this on either three of the drafts, we'd want the OAuth OpenID Connect stuff in first, because a lot of this stuff is stuff that in general, the general public wouldn't be doing. We would want someone authorized to do. So that if the working group has to take on this work, I think it would be important for the working group to prioritize the OAuth stuff first. Secondly, when we get into this conversation, this working group about what's supposed to be informational, what's supposed to be standard or whatnot, this is all very foundational work. So I do think this is the right place for the working group, and it should be done here if Mario wants to take it forward. It's going to be a lot of work, but I do think this would be standards track work.
Scott Hollenbeck. And there's a corollary to what Andrew mentioned earlier in the context of EPP. Right now, we're not well suited to take on new work. I know I've been trying to get a particular draft adopted, or at least to have the question posed to the group now for quite some time, and I'm continually told that we need to clear our plate a little bit. All right, so here's some encouragement. Folks, clear your plate, because RDAP is moving into production as we speak. We are going to encounter more and more challenges like this as we work to solve real problems. And if this working group is not ready to take on the questions associated with these problems and willing to put some answers to paper, we're going to get bypassed. I mean, I've thought myself about just saying, forget this working group and I'm going to go have a little chat with the AD about doing an AD-sponsored draft, because I've got operational problems to solve. All right, so please, let's get our plates cleared. Let's think about some of these RDAP-focused documents, and let's get some answers out there.
Yeah, and speaking as chair and not, and I have not obviously coordinated this with Antoine. I mean, to me, one of the important questions about what this group does or doesn't take on is the amount of work that's involved. I mean, this is looking like it could be, a substantial bit of work. And I suspect that it probably is more appropriate. It may or may not be an appropriate document for this group to take on. We really had created this working group to deal with extensions, EPP and RDAP extensions, and this feels like it might be a little more than that. So it's a question worth considering, and I'm sure when the time comes, our AD will have an opinion about that too. So it might end up being something that's spun off and can be dealt with separately, just for that reason. So, okay. Is that, you got your comments and you're satisfied for now?
I should say that I think that there are some RDAP implementers that are asking me about these drafts, especially sorting and paging draft. Brian Mumford is only an example of people that are implementing the RDAP servers. So I think that this topic should be defined if we can think that that they are interesting. But it's only my opinion. It's not. I think that this idea should be shared by the entire working group.
Scott Hollenbeck, and I'm sorry, I forgot. Andrew had mentioned something that I brought up in the chat about the federated authentication document too. Eventually, I do intend to request that the working group consider adopting that document, but there's one thing in particular that's holding me back on that right now, and that's that the document talks about this notion of acceptable query purposes, right? And at least in the GTLD space, that is very policy dependent. And the policy work that's touching on this question of query purpose is still very much a work in progress. So this may be a question that's better queued up for discussion in London, because I'm certainly hoping that 6 months from now or 5 months from now, whatever it is, that at least in the ICANN space, some of those questions will have been asked and answered, and maybe I'll have a better sense of where that conversation went, and I'll have the document in a slightly better state.
Honestly, I put the point of reverse with and permissible purposes of queries because I found this topic treated in the ICANN document, but my idea when I wrote the draft and implemented this on .it public test server was to give an answer to the .it registrars asking for the list of domains related to contacts or related to technical contacts or related to registrants, because I have thought to this solution, but I'm not an expert of query purposes about with and about reverse with.
Roger?
Yeah, this is Roger. I think Scott's a little optimistic on the 5 months and maybe London, but purpose is definitely being talked about. So hopefully we do get to that spot in the near future. It was interesting. I actually came up here to say something, and your last comment just made me think about that. But from a registrar standpoint, I don't really see this as being useful for a registrar. I think it's interesting, but we would definitely not implement this on our RDAP implementation. But your point about registrars asking you, for a list like this. I don't know. I just don't see registrars being all that interested in this, but I didn't see it from a registry's perspective of a registrar asking them. I don't think we would, but that's a different point. So.
At .it we have an amount of medium, small registrars losing their data or trusting the registry about their data. So if they want to perform some operations, they ask the registry to give to provide the data to perform these operations.
Okay. Thanks.
I don't know if it's only a case of .it or it's similar to other environment.
This is Ulrich from IIS. I want to second you. The most requests we get from our registrars is actually a way to download lists of which domains they are responsible for, which contacts they are responsible for. If you would guess that they have a database of that, but you know, so that's what I get. The first if I meet a registrar, the first or second question I get is, when will we have lists in EPP?
For example, I looked at the draft submitted by James Gould about bulk updates. So the question was, how can I submit this operation if I cannot have the data to perform this operation? The list of domains, the list of net servers.
So, Andy Newton, so the use cases that were just cited seem to be more appropriate for EPP than RDAP. They're not?
No one lists in EPP. I think this is much better for this.
All right.
Okay, so we were, for those remotely, we were just sort of cut off by some discussion in the room about we don't want lists in EPP, so that's why this is in an RDAP appropriate thing. So, okay.
Okay. Thank you a lot.
All right, so that brings us to a discussion about interim meeting feedback. Jody was in the queue and he took himself out of the queue. Okay, sorry about that. The interim meeting was yours, Roger. So you want to come up to the pink box here and say a few words about how that went and, well, the one that was successful.
Roger again. So I think we've had 3 now. For the first 2 were very productive. I think that it was maybe the content that was appropriate for everyone. I don't know, that interested. The last one, we got 0 participation. There was 4 or 5 of us on the call, but it was those that arranged the call. So we did discuss things and we made decisions for everybody. So I'm glad that everybody attended now. I think an interim meeting has worked out well. On the prior, this last one again was not attended well, but I think it was more content. The fee document has been worked quite well. So I think people are starting to lose the interest on discussing those last little details to get through. So, but again, the last meeting was not what was anticipated, but again, it's not, I guess, unrealistic for people not to show up when it starts to tail off. So that's my only comments. I don't know if anybody had questions about the meetings or.
In general, I just want to say I think the working group, I think the interim meetings are working. It certainly has helped to move along the couple of documents that Roger has been pressing, to get done and in a good state as to where we are. And in theory, the working group session that we would have had, but doesn't look like we're going to have at the moment here, would have done the same thing to help move along some new ideas. So and the validate document. But I think we'll just continue down this path. The single purpose interim meetings are a good thing and been working out really well for us. So that's a good thing. Okay. That brings us down to any other business. And I have one thing that I wanted to put on the table, but I'll reserve that for the end. And I see Andy walking to the microphone, so please go ahead.
Yes. So I was wondering if we want to start thinking about some BCPs for RDAP. Two things just recently happened that I think would be interesting as more people start spinning up RDAP servers. One was someone started circulating a list of conformance issues with RDAP, and they were like, hey, Scott, do you know the person who runs this server, and can you forward this email on? And so these basically chain emails that were going on trying to get to the people who were authoritative for the servers. So we might want to consider like a BCP on putting something in the /help of how do you contact the people who actually operate the server. The other one is we might want to have to visit the whole thing about putting HTTP and HTTPS URLs in the IANA Bootstrap files. I've run into some problems with my client, people reporting that they can't talk to certain registries because of TLS issues. Like a lot of Macs apparently ship an extremely old version of OpenSSL that doesn't talk newer TLS. And so they can't end up talking to these RDAP servers because they only list the HTTPS URL, which is what we want them to do if they can do it. But some people might want to drop back to doing an insecure, just regular HTTP thing. So that's also something I want to think about.
Thank you for that. That actually is a nice segue into what I wanted to mention, but let me just see if there's any other comments or questions from the room. In MeetEcho, you want to speak? Other business? So please go ahead. I'll come. My point can still wait till the end.
Stefan Bartmeyer, AFNIC. As seen on TV, as seen on the mailing list, there have been a discussion in DNSSOP about the possible registration of a .internal local TLD. And one of the points was it was planned to add it in the root and to delegate it to AS112 with DNAME. And RFC 7535 explains why it has to be DNAME and not NS records. And one of the things that were mentioned was that currently IANA on the VeriSign communicates over EPP for the management of the root zone. And there is no way in EPP to delegate a name with DNAME record, only with NS records. So the point was, is it a good idea to create a new mapping or to extend the RFC 5731 mapping for domain name? Is it a good idea, stupid idea? Does it have to be a RFC or just a local extension? So comments or ideas are welcome.
Interesting. I actually was not aware of that discussion. I kind of missed that detail. And I see we have, Scott, you jumped in front of somebody who's trying to beat you there.
Sorry.
All right,
Scott Hollenbeck.
Go ahead.
Yeah, the long and short of it is I think this is an interesting question. It's one we should take up on the mailing list. We should talk about it.
Yeah. Thank you.
Kim Davies. If the only use case is the one you presented, I would suggest not working on it. But if there's broader application, then yes.
Yeah. I do think that our mailing list is available for broad and open discussion about issues. There really isn't any other home for any kind of registration-related question or discussion, and we just have to see if there's traction for doing the work, and then we get to examine whether or not it needs to be a milestone as part of this working group or should be funneled to some other location. Which kind of brings me to the point that I wanted to bring up. We've had discussions in the past. We have actually I think 5 documents, and I'm not even sure I could rattle them off the top of my head, pending adoption by this working group, beginning with one Scott fondly referenced earlier in one of his comments up at the microphone earlier. However, this working group, its charter really is restricted to just EPP extensions and RDAP extensions. it really is not within its charter to do slightly more broad-based documents related to registration in general. However, as part of the discussion that we had a year ago about adopting these documents, when we had that whole concept set aside until we cleared our docket, and our docket is clearing and we're becoming eligible to add new documents onto our list, we have also, again, started the discussion with our area director about broadening our charter just a little bit. I think it's possible by just adding a sentence or two about additional things that we can work on. And, you know, he is agreeable to that. And so one of the things that we need to do in parallel with finishing the cleanup here over the next short couple of months on the documents we talked about earlier is to send a note to the mailing list and have a discussion about the little bit that we can add to our charter to broaden it so we can take on some of these other topics and adopt these documents. And, you know, our area director will be paying attention to that and will work with us to get the right words that we can use. And then we'll get our charter run through the approval process that it needs. And then as these documents clear, we can quickly adopt the other documents. But we should be in a pretty good place here. I think that, you know, before the London meeting, we should have cleared off a number of documents and adopted a bunch of new documents and have new ongoing work that's happening. I mean, that's my goal here, just speaking without actually coordinating specifically with Antoine about it. But in general, that's a goal about moving stuff forward. Okay. One last, so that was my comment there. Let me just pause and see if anyone has any questions or comments about that before I move on to one last thing. I'm not seeing anybody jumping up. Okay. So Roger, you were the one who had the two documents that you wanted to have a working session about, and we have totally usurped that time. I do apologize for that, but on the other hand, I think we were having some really good discussion here, and I really didn't want to set that aside. I think this is a good time to bring up the fact that the IETF does, at this meeting, they've had it before, it's been an experiment and it's been working out well. They have a room that you can sign out to use for a working session. There is a Hullet room. I think actually this meeting we have two, don't we? Yeah, there's actually two meeting rooms this time. So if you have an account on the wiki, there's a way to go up and sign up and sign out the room for an hour. And actually you can, they actually encourage multiple people to sign out the room, especially in the case of the larger one, because that way you get, you know, cross communication, but you can find a corner of the room to sit down and work. So what I wanted to offer to you is if rather than saying that we have totally given up on those working sessions, if you want to look and see about signing out a room slot, maybe we can have a little bit of a dialogue on the mailing list about finding a good time to sign it out for. You can go look at some options, pick something that works for you, and then you know, try and work something out on the mailing list and see if we can pick a couple of those two documents and pick up some work sessions for them. Otherwise, we'll continue with our interim model. And I'll give you a chance at this point here to comment on all of that.
Thanks, Jim. This is Roger. I think that's good to know. I didn't realize that, but it may be difficult to find time, but we can try that. Definitely, I'm going to try to promote the next interim meeting then, so that we can get onto these topics, and the registry mapping topic will be a big one and a long one. So I think once we get back and get beyond the holiday here, I'll try to get an interim meeting set up at the beginning of December sometime that we can start working on it quickly. So, Alex.
Alex, go ahead.
Alex Mayover. One thing that came up in our ongoing RDAP implementation efforts is that the exact semantics of the search with the asterisk are a little bit underspecified in the RFCs. So I'm getting a lot of heat from our developers for not working with you guys correctly and getting the right language into the RFCs. So I would appreciate if someone has time that we can maybe sort out a few of those unclear things regarding asterisk. Yeah, I think it takes about 15 minutes and I'm up for like sitting together in a corner or something like that. It would certainly help us getting our implementation forward.
Okay, let me just suggest that anyone who wants to talk about searching should please come on up here in the beginning and talk to Alex and see if we can set that time up. In fact, actually, those who want to continue with the working session might actually come up here at the end of the meeting and touch base with Roger right away, because maybe if you don't actually get a good group of traction who want to make time, you might as well just go for an interim meeting and not work that hard. But let's see if we can get 2 or 3 people up here, get some traction to have that meeting. And then one last thing before Scott talks, if anybody has not signed the blue sheet and you want it, please be sure to come on up here after this meeting is about to be over and sign. Roger, go ahead. Scott, go ahead,
sorry,
please.
Scott Hollenbeck. Yeah, Alex, I think your observation about that text correctly captures the confusion of the author in trying to capture the working group's consensus on how that all worked, which as in it's a complete mess. But having said that, I do have another internet draft out there that talks about doing searching using POSIX regular expressions, which I think is very well specified. And if that would potentially be a solution, let's have a conversation about that, as Jim just said.
Okay. Any other business from the floor? No? Okay. Well, then I want to thank everyone. This really has been, an exceptionally good working group meeting for this working group over the past year. I'm really excited, and we had some really good discussion, and I appreciate that. I really do. So thanks very much for that. Look forward to seeing more activity on the mailing list. Please, if you want a working session with Roger, come on up and make that known. And other than that, we're adjourned. Blue sheets if you need them. It's good to see you. How you doing? I'm doing good.
Fighting with the jet lag and stuff. Because he's kind of sick and sleep.
Oh, yes,
No,
I know.
Girls. Still alive and not sleepwalking.
You know, sometimes it's all that matters, right?